Now, the Beijing+30 African Women's Movement has warned that Africa is entering a dangerous moment in which war, civilian suffering, and humanitarian collapse are increasingly being treated as normal features of political life. The movement says the continent cannot afford to become numb to daily reports of bombed villages, displaced communities, massacred civilians, sexual violence, starvation, collapsing states, and deepening humanitarian crises. The movement says the causes of these wars include external interference, geopolitical competition, and proxy warfare, competition for strategic influence, and struggles over natural resources, fragmented mediation, weak conflict prevention, and inadequate civilian protection. To expand the conversation, we're joined on the line now by Chairperson of the Beijing+30 African Women's Movement, Geraldine Fraser Moleketi. A very good evening to you. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to your viewers as well.
Brilliant. It's lovely to have you on the show. As we try and get a better understanding, I mean, you've issued quite a stark warning here saying Africa's essentially entering a very dangerous moment where war, humanitarian, everything, that has been singled out is becoming normalized. What are you seeing on the ground that's prompting such a strong statement as you reflect on the developments across the continent?
You know, at the moment, we are aware that Africa has more than 40% of active armed conflicts. We also know that the Sudan has generated the world's largest displacement crisis, with more than 9 million people being forced from their homes since April of 2023. We also know that the DRC has seen more than 7 million internally displaced persons. Now, this makes it one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes on earth. So, what we recognize that knowing numbers is not the same as knowing wars, because numbers tend to anesthetize. They become background noise. And the extent of the war is not only geographic. For example, territories lost, towns burnt to the ground, but it's human. Children that have known nothing but displacement, women who carry the memory of violence in their bodies, the social fabrics that take generations to weave and moments to shred. And that's what we feel we need to confront.
Absolutely. I mean, as you point to external interference and beyond these wars being geographic, proxy wars and competition are also some of the key drivers. Are global powers, do you think, increasingly turning Africa into a battleground for their own strategic interests? I mean, do we even really know the extent of war on the continent, particularly looking at areas like Sudan, the DRC, Mozambique, and others?
Look, probably it must be said quite plainly. The story of Africa is not a story of innocent victims and outsider villains. It's a story of complicity. The external forces, and here former colonial powers, multinational corporations, new geopolitical actors, they couldn't operate without African partners. And these are the partners that in instances may well be giving speeches about sovereignty at African Union summits while signing off mineral rights in private. They may be generals who supply conflict minerals to international traders, or they may be politicians who grant tax exemptions to extractive industries in exchange for campaign financing or personal enrichment. And we see it playing out. We've seen in the DRC the nexus between the political elite and international mining interests. And this is well documented. You know, you can go to other countries as well. In the Sudan, both sides of the civil war are funded by the gold trade, with gold finding its way into international markets.
Yeah, the competition over natural resources, of course, has always played a pivotal role in conflict. And one of the concerns that you touched on just a moment ago was, the human element, children who are who only know displacement. And the concern you raise is that of civilians, particularly women and children who are carrying the heaviest burden. Are governments and regional bodies doing enough to prioritize civilian protection in conflict zones? Because as we speak, women and children, we cannot separate the possibilities of sexual violence continuing to emerge as one of the devastating weapons of war.
So let me start at a different point and say we must revive and reimagine African-led peacemaking. And you would recall that the silencing of the guns initiative by the African Union was supposed to end all wars by 2020, and it did not. Now, the failure is not a failure of ideas. It's the failure of political will, of funding, of willingness to hold member states accountable. But as you correctly point out, who are the ones suffering in the process? It's the children. And what we should do is ensure that we don't normalize wars so that the children who die, the women who are subjected to displacement, and in many instances are also the frontline defenders, they shouldn't just be statistics. We must call out their names. We must ensure that we don't treat war as though we're dealing with the weather, and it's just a weather report. If we listened to the news earlier in your report, you were reflecting on what's happening elsewhere in the continent, and we say we need to deal with this issue and introduce something more. And when we say we're not talking as women in South Africa, we're talking as women across the continent.
Absolutely. So, as you speak about some of the plans that were in place, talking about the silencing of guns initiative of 2020, we're in 2026. From your perspective at this point in time, what urgent interventions do you think are needed right now to stop the humanitarian crises from spiraling even further, especially in already fragile environments?
So a couple of things. I mean, we touched on the peace architecture, and we say it's not quite working. But the failure is not simply one of competence. It's a failure of design. So these organizations were built to manage interstate conflict. But most of Africa's wars we've seen are intrastate. They're civil wars, they're insurgencies, it's around resource conflicts and so on. And these organizations are built on the principle of non-interference and so on, and hide behind sovereignty. And we're saying these institutions shouldn't be abandoned, but they need to be transformed, that there's a need to develop the capacity and the political will to intervene in member states. But above all, there's a need to empower those communities, the women who are actually the frontline defenders, the ones who are out there who should engage. So there's a need for a popular and continental refusal to accept war as normal. Institutions will not change unless they are pushed. And the push should come from us, from the women's movement, from students, from the diaspora, from every African who refuses to accept the future uh, in terms of what it looks like as
Absolutely.
present.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for speaking to
Thank
us
you.
there as we reflect on some of the many struggles faced by those who are displaced, and with that warning of Africa entering a dangerous moment in which war, civilian suffering, humanitarian collapse are seemingly the order of the day. Chairperson of the Beijing+30 African Women's Movement, Geraldine Fraser Moleketi.